Only days after what should have been an exciting Christmas break in Sumter, South Carolina, 13-year-old Margaret Edwards Peg Cuttino was found dead in a wooded area approximately 20 miles away from her home. Who was the abductor and murderer? A lonely, sadistic drifter? Or an accomplished serial killer? The police were eager to solve her abduction and murder. After all, she was the daughter of a prominent local businessman and politician, James Edwards Cuttino. Join us as we discuss and try to unravel the mystery of the Princess of Sumter County, the murder and abduction of Margaret Cuttino. Friday, December 18th, 1970. Approximately noon. It was the last day of school before Christmas break. It was an unusually warm autumn day. 13-year-old Margaret Edwards Peg Cuttino left her home at 45 Mason Croft Drive to walk a short distance to have lunch with her baby sister at Willow Drive Elementary and disappeared only to be found nearly 2 weeks later, dead in a wooded area behind a church some 20 miles away. Peg wore the same outfit she had worn earlier that morning when she attended school at Alice Drive Middle School. A dark blue, long-sleeved turtleneck knit sweater, white cotton pant skirt, and a blue and white polka dot sash tied around her waist. She was approximately 5 feet tall and weighed 130 pounds. She had mahogany brown hair and blue eyes. She resided with her father, James Edwards Cuttino, the South Carolina representative from the Sumter district, mother, Margaret, younger sister, Pamela, and her brother, James, at 45 Mason Croft Drive. The home was a medium-sized home with a white vinyl siding and dark shutters. It was in an affluent Sumter neighborhood next door to one of the wealthiest neighbors in all of Sumter County, living in a mansion consisting of nearly 7,000 square feet on a gated estate. Peg's father, James, was born May 24th, 1924, to his parents, James Cuttino Sr. and Lucy Olivia Edwards in Sumter, South Carolina. He resided with his family at 334 Church Street. James distinguished himself in both middle and high school glee clubs and bands. He was also gifted in dramatics and took the lead in school and little theater plays. At the age of 19, James served in the United States military around June 30th, 1942, around his 18th birthday. He served honorably during World War II. After the war, James settled down and married Margaret Poole of Clemson, South Carolina in 1955. He was 30 years old and she was 26. James served on the Sumter City Council from 1960 to 1964 and served in the South Carolina House of Representatives from 1964 to 1972. While in the House, he served as chairman of the House Medical, Military, and Municipal Affairs Committee, served on the boards of the Medical University of South Carolina State Insurance Commission, and Board of Visitors of the Citadel. He was instrumental in the founding of Clemson University at Sumter, which later became the University of South Carolina at Sumter, as well as Sumter Area Technical College, founder of the Civilian Club, and a member of the Kiwanis Club, Elks Lodge, and Sumter Board of Realtors, where he served as an officer, and the State Board of Realtors, where he also served as an officer. And he was also co-owner of James Cuttino and Son Real Estate, located on Broad Street in Sumter. Peg's mother, Margaret, was born May 28, 1929, to parents Dr. Robert Franklin Poole and Sarah Margaret Bradley in Raleigh, North Carolina. She moved to Clemson at the age of 10 when her father accepted the position of president of Clemson College. She attended Converse College in Spartanburg after high school, and later transferred to Winthrop College in Rock Hill, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and English. Margaret Cuttino was an actress and singer performing for local theaters in South Carolina. Her most notable part was Donrath Henry in King of Hearts. She also sang in musicals given at Converse College and performed in several plays at the Clemson Little Theater. Peg was born September 30th, 1957 in Sumter. She was named after her mother Margaret and her father's middle name Edwards. Peg grew up the darling princess of Sumter due to her father's prominence as both a local businessman and politician. Peg attended all of his campaign rallies during the 1960s. She was also a member of the youth choir at the First Presbyterian Church, studied the Bible at Sunday school, and was a member of the Pioneer Youth Fellowship. Little is known about Peg's actual home life during the 1960s. What little we know is that she displayed flashes of rebellion as she turned 13. She wanted to hang out with older kids, not necessarily in her own social circle. She was also known to have stormed out of her parents' home on one or two occasions. At Alice Drive Junior High School, Peg was a starter on the girls' varsity basketball team and was an above-average student. She was also popular among her peers at school. On Friday, December 18, 1970, Peg attended the last day of school before Christmas break. Because of this, her school had early dismissal around 11 o'clock that morning. Peg chatted with her schoolmates and walked to a nearby restaurant off Ginyard Drive and Miller Road for a brief time. She then continued to walk home. When she arrived around noon, she convinced her mother to allow her to walk to her sister's elementary school, which was nearby, to visit her old teachers and attend her sister's Christmas party. She promised to walk Pamela home when school was dismissed. Peg traveled north on Wynn Street and turned west on Willow Drive, passing the rear entrance to the Sumter County YMCA building, which was undergoing needed repairs to the roof. Willow Drive was adjacent to the facility. Some neighbors remembered seeing Peg walking toward Willow Drive that afternoon. Peg never made it to Willow Drive Elementary. She seemed to have vanished off the face of the earth. When Pamela arrived home after school without Peg and explained that she never showed up to her school, Mrs. Cuttino promptly called the Sumter Police Department. By 3:00 p.m., one of the largest searches in South Carolina's history began. Helicopters from nearby Shaw Air Force Base and many volunteers joined in the search. Radio and television broadcast Peg's disappearance and how to contact authorities if they had any information concerning her whereabouts. By sundown of that Friday, the search covered nearly 4 square miles of the YMCA building without a single clue. For days, the search for Peg continued, and each day ended in frustration and deepening fear that Peg would not be found. First clue. The first major clue came a few days later when Noah Jerry Artrip and his father of 106 Reynolds Road in Sumter saw the television broadcast of Peg's disappearance. Jerry asked his father to call the police because he remembered seeing Peg that afternoon. Sheriff Ira Bird Parnell asked the young man to come down to the police station for questioning. At the police station, Jerry Artrip provided the following statement.
My name is Noah Jerry Artrip. On December 18, 1970, I was an 8th grade student at Alice Drive Junior High School. I was a classmate of Peg Cuttino. I had no classes with her, but I did know her, a lot of her friends, and had on occasion spoken with her. On December 18, 1970, we were having exams at school. I left school shortly after 12 noon and walked 2 blocks to my house. I went to a friend's house on bicycle to eat lunch. Before lunch, I rode back to my house to get my wallet and then returned to my friend's house on Lenore Street. On the way back to his house, I saw a dirty white or beige car. The car was small like a Comet or Ford. The car was not new. The car was coming towards me and took a left turn on Phelps Street onto Wren Street. This occurred at about 1 p.m. There was a white man driving a car with dark colored hair with glasses. He was between 30 and 35 years of age. A woman was sitting in the front passenger seat. I could not see her face. I am positive Peg Cuttino was in the back seat of the car on the right side. I saw her face and her eyes were open. I waved to her, but she did not wave back.
The Sumter Police Department immediately issued an all-points bulletin for Peg Cuttino, and the FBI were called in to assist in the possible kidnapping. However, by the end of the weekend, no new clues surfaced, despite the fact that several suspects were interviewed in the Sumter area. One of those initial suspects was Donald Henry Peewee Gaskins, who would later confess to the murders of 13 people from Charleston, Florence, Williamsburg, and Sumter counties. He was able to provide an alibi for December 18th, stating that he was at work all day at the YMCA building. Several of his employees were able to vouch for him, and he was cleared as a suspect. The discovery. On Wednesday, December 30th, 1970, 2 Shaw Air Force captains were riding their motorcycles on the dirt roads of the Manchester State Forest, located a few miles south of Wedgefield, which was approximately 16 miles west of Sumter. They splashed through mud puddles from the recent snowstorm before noticing what appeared to be a mannequin off to the right of the main dirt road. As the officers drew closer, they recognized the clothes described in the local newspaper. It was Peg Cuttino. She was lying face down and covered slightly with branches, leaves, and moss. Her white skirt and underwear had been yanked down and halfway down her thighs to expose her bare buttocks. There were numerous scratches, bruises, and what appeared to be burns all over her hips, thighs, and legs. Her arms were stretched around her head. The blue and white polka dot sash had been secured around her neck, with a large knot resting on the side of her face. 2 huge gashes were found on her forehead and the back of her head. Blood from those wounds had clung to the leaves. The captains immediately contacted the local police, and within minutes, the Sumter County Sheriff had the area surrounded. The pathologist called to the scene performed a preliminary autopsy on the body as Sheriff Bird Parnell quietly watched. He was visibly upset as he was personally good friends with James Cuttino and knew his daughter very well. Nothing at the crime scene indicated how the horrendous murder occurred. The pathologist was only able to determine that Peg Cuttino was violated, strangled, tortured, and beaten about the head with a small blunt object. He felt strongly that the cause of death was most likely the dual blows to the head. There was also an unexplained Z-shaped imprint on the upper side of her face. Then the pathologist stated that he thought that the time of death occurred on Friday, December 18, 1970, the same day Peg went missing. Once the body had been moved to the Medical University of South Carolina, the official autopsy began. At the conclusion of the autopsy, several things were discovered that would remain permanently unresolved to this day. First, dark, curly pubic hairs were removed from Margaret Cuttino's inner thighs, pubic, and rectal areas. Then there was the discovery of mature sperm with tails in Peg's private parts that could not normally exist past 3 to 5 days maximum exposure. Perhaps the most damning evidence occurred with the histological report. There had been very little decomposition present, which would indicate that the victim had only been dead for a few days, not 12 days. If you place the time of death on December 18, 1970, all of the evidence strongly suggested that the abductor and murderer was someone with black hair, and that Peg was not murdered on December 18th, but probably between December 25th, Christmas Day, and December 28th. The aftermath. Within days of the funeral, an article appeared in the local Sumter Daily Item, offering a $5,000 reward to anyone that could provide information leading to the arrest and conviction of persons or person involved in the murder of Margaret Peg Cuttino. Soon a young man and his father came forth to tell an unusual tale about an incident that occurred in the area where Peg's body was found around the time of her disappearance. The young man, Earl Williams, told Sumter Police Chief Leslie Griffin and Sheriff Ira Bird Parnell that he and his father were hunting for squirrels and gathering firewood in the Manchester State Forest on December 19th or 20th. From about 200 feet away, they noticed a white man of medium build with slick black hair standing at the rear of a white station wagon with large round tail lights. At first, they assumed that it was the game warden, but eventually settled on the fact that the man's car had probably broken down. 2 hours later, when they came back through the same area on their way home, they noticed that the man was still there and his trunk was now open. They did not offer any assistance. Later in the week, 3 other young men came forward to give an account of their encounter while in the Manchester State Forest. They stated that they were hunting in the area where Peg's body would later be found on Christmas Eve, December 24th, and that they did not see any evidence of a dead body. The police checked out their story and proved by their temporary hunting permits issued to each of them that they were indeed in the Manchester State Forest on Christmas Eve. The authorities were now perplexed. The only substantial clues to Peg's disappearance and murder seemed to conflict with each other. If her body had been dumped on December 19th or 20th, then the guys hunting in the area would have surely noticed the body. There didn't appear to be a direct answer. No further clues or witnesses came forth. It looked as if the case would never be solved. Enter William Jr. Pierce. On March 18, 1971, a tall man who stood over 6 feet tall with reddish hair and medium build was arrested in Georgia for failure to pay for gas at a local gas station in Baxley, Georgia, and parole violation. When he was questioned, the local authorities realized that he was responsible for several unsolved crimes in the area. The man's name was William Jr. Pierce. He was quickly charged with the murder of 60-year-old Vivian Sutton Miles, a gas station attendant, and assault of her 5-year-old granddaughter on January 28, 1971. While incarcerated, he began confessing to other crimes that he supposedly committed in both Georgia and South Carolina. However, it soon discovered that he actually had solid alibis for most of the crimes he confessed to. It was determined that William was a serial confessor, someone who would convincingly recite back to an officer what he was being conditioned to say. As a result, he was not charged with any of the crimes he confessed to. In spite of this, on April 29, 1971, William again admitted to a crime. This time he confessed to the murder of Margaret Edwards Peg Cuttino in the presence of South Carolina law enforcement officers and Sumter Police Chief Leslie Griffin, Sheriff Ira Bird Parnell, and Appleton County Sheriff J.B. Carter. Pierce confession. William stated that on December 18, 1970, as he sat in his maroon Pontiac eating lunch at a drive-in restaurant in Sumter, he noticed Peg Cuttino arguing with a teenage boy and girl. They appeared to be much older than her. He tried to ignore their argument, but their heated quarrel soon got to him. He exited his car and walked over to the teenagers. The young man noticed him and pulled out a chain from his car. He wrapped it around his fist. Junior Pierce reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his revolver. The boy was spooked and grabbed his girlfriend. The two promptly sped off, leaving Peg behind. She was grateful for his assistance. As she approached him, he glanced over to the restaurant and noticed a woman watching him while talking on a phone. He quickly put his revolver away. Peg asked him for a ride home. He agreed to take her home. He traveled on a long stretch of highway that passed what he thought was an airport. He turned left down the nearest road and passed through a small town near a railroad track. He drove to a dirt road on the left and came to a stop just outside of that town. The authorities took his simple directions to mean that he drove down Highway 378 and 76, heading west from Sumter and past Shaw Air Force Base. He then turned left onto Highway 61, which goes through a small community called Wedgefield. The dirt roads on the left outside of town actually led into Manchester State Forest, the exact area where Peg's body was eventually found. Peg cried and tried to explain to him that she needed to go home, but he refused. He explained that he had recently been paroled from prison and was not allowed to have a gun. He thought the woman at the restaurant saw him and reported him to the police. He could not take the chance of being caught with the gun. Then, in a sudden panic, Peg opened her door in an attempt to flee, but tripped and fell out of it instead. He exited the vehicle, grabbing his tire iron from under the seat. As Peg tried to stand, he hit her on the back of the head. As she collapsed, he took out his handkerchief and wet it in a nearby puddle to wipe away the blood. He turned her over after he was done and noticed that she wasn't breathing. Realizing that she may still be alive, he hit her once more on the forehead before placing her back into the maroon plane. He drove further into the woods. He exited his car for the second time at this point. He picked up Peg from the passenger seat and threw her body to the ground. He removed her blue and white polka dot sash from her waist and tied it around her neck, around her shoulders, and under her armpits before pulling with all of his might. Then he heard a noise. He glanced up and noticed a man and boy a few yards away. They were carrying rifles. He panicked and raced over to his car in order to hide his Georgia license plate from them until they passed. Afterwards, he went back to covering up Peg's body with leaves and moss and prepared a shallow grave. He remained in the woods until it was dark and safe for him to drive back to Georgia. He concluded that he took Interstate 95 south back to Georgia. Then, as quickly as he confessed to the murder, William recanted and said that he was forced to confess to Sheriff J.B. Carter, who provided him with all the details of the murder case. However, this confession would not go away as easily as the others, even when it was revealed that his employer and 4 other employees had provided him with a solid alibi for December 18th. Williams' advocates explained that Sheriff Carter seized upon the opportunity to become a local hero and solve a major South Carolina case when he realized that William was a habitual confessor of crimes that he did not commit. William eventually took his claims to the U.S. Justice Department in 1971. He described to the officials that while being questioned for the murder of Peg Cuttino, he was repeatedly tortured and shot with a long metallic device by Sheriff Carter and a Georgia Federal Bureau agent to confess. It was discovered at a hearing that he initially got all of the facts to the case wrong. Sheriff Carter thought William was trying to mislead them and provided him with the actual details in an attempt to refresh his poor memory. William's confession of the Cuttino murder was never officially written down or recorded. Furthermore, he was never questioned regarding the sexual assault evidence discovered during the autopsy. Police agents were advised that William would not discuss such matters to law enforcement and to not waste any of this time asking him those types of questions. When asked to take a polygraph, William refused and was promptly charged with Peg Cuttino's murder. Not surprisingly, he would eventually take the polygraph test. The results were inconclusive of guilt. Why this case should be re-examined. To this day, no physical evidence was ever found that linked William Pierce to the murder of Peg Cuttino. Repeat, to this day, no physical evidence was ever found that linked William Pierce to the murder of Peg Cuttino. The murder weapon was never found. His alleged confession was never recorded or written down by police. No forensic evidence such as hair, fibers, or blood pointed to his guilt. The time of Peg's death has never been officially determined. All sexual evidence found at the scene and during the autopsy was dropped and never discussed again, especially during Pierce's trial. The pubic hairs removed from Peg's thighs and private parts were black and curly. William Pierce had red hair. No witnesses at the restaurant ever came forth to describe an argument on December 18th. The boy and girl that supposedly had the argument with Peg have never been located. Originally, William stated in his alleged confession that Peg was actually arguing with 2 grown men before changing it to a teenage boy and girl. Williams' time card showed that he arrived at work at the Swainsboro plant in Statesboro, Georgia at 7:30 a.m. and left at 4:00 p.m. on December 18, 1970. At 1:20 p.m., Williams' supervisor had him sign for his paycheck, which is required by Georgia law. His supervisor, James Conyers, the bookkeeper, the owner of the company, and several workers admitted under oath that William was at work on December 18, 1970. William also confessed to driving a maroon Pontiac on December 18th, but the Swainsboro police chief said that William had been driving his mother's light blue Ford, which was in very poor shape and could not have possibly been driven over 600 miles to South Carolina and back. Earl Williams told authorities that he saw Pierce in Manchester State Forest on December 19th or 20th, standing in front of a white Ford station wagon with large round tail lights. William confessed to driving a maroon Pontiac, which had rectangular-shaped taillights. If he lied, then the only other car he could have possibly driven would have been his mother's light blue Ford, not a white Ford station wagon. Earl said the man combed his hair from front to back. William did not wear his hair in that style. Earl never mentioned the man's height. William was unusually tall. If Earl was close enough to describe the man's hairstyle, then he would have surely noticed that the man was very tall and lanky and not a man with a medium build as he initially described. A young man came forward by the name of F. Parker Haley in 1971 and stated that he called Sheriff Parnell's home and spoke with his wife. He explained to her that he was in Manchester State Forest on December 20th, 1970, and noticed a white man with dark complexion and hair standing behind a white Ford station wagon. He appeared to be holding something down in the trunk. The man was heavy built and appeared to be repairing his vehicle. Was this the actual person Earl Williams saw on December 20th? If so, then this individual could not have been William Pierce. He did not own a white Ford station wagon, nor had access to anyone who did. Miss Parnell told Haley that she would relay the information to her husband. However, he was never contacted. Sheriff Parnell later stated in a grand jury probe years later that he had never known about the call. Enter Peewee Gaskins. As stated earlier, Donald Henry Peewee Gaskins was initially a suspect in the disappearance of Peg Cuttino after Sumter authorities interviewed every man that had ever been in prison in Sumter County. Peewee's supervisor, Roy Harrington, was able to verify that Gaskins was indeed at work the entire day on December 18, 1970. As a result, Peewee was officially cleared as a suspect. However, in April 1977, while being tried for the murder of Silas Barnwell Yates, Peewee went on record and announced in open court that he indeed was ordered to murder Peg Cuttino in 1970 by lawmen in Sumter County. He later described the manner and motive after the trial to a newspaper reporter in a letter received on January 8, 1979. Peewee explained that Peg Cuttino was walking down the sidewalk when a man approached her brandishing a gun. He whispered to her and forced her into a car, and the ex-convict and Peg drove off. He witnessed the entire incident while on the Sumter YMCA grounds. Peg was murdered, he continued, under orders of 2 Sumter County police officers. The ex-convict was assigned to kidnap and hide her until 8:30 p.m. December 19, 1970. Late Saturday night, Peewee stated that he assisted 2 police officers in killing and transporting Peg Cuttino in the back seat of a police vehicle to a place in the woods where the body was thrown out. According to him, Janice Kirby, Patricia Osbrook, Jessie Wood Judy, and Peg Cuttino participated in the making of pornographic movies under the direction of an attorney in Sumter, who mysteriously died on December 18, 1970. All of the participants were paid $100 for their involvement. Is this the true version of what happened to Margaret Cuttino? Or was Peewee merely trying to mislead everyone of his involvement? It does seem unlikely that this version of events actually occurred. For starters, how did the ex-convict and Peewee know that Peg Cuttino would walk down the road when she did? And he never explained the torture or abuse she received and was afflicted upon. However, Peewee continued to stick to the claim that he murdered Peg, and in his book, Final Truth, he provides yet another scenario of his involvement in the murder. According to his autobiography, he walked past the Fort Roofing Company truck in order to put away his tools. It was the end of the workday. He was the only worker near the truck at this time. Peg was with a group of girls walking toward Willow Drive Elementary. They passed him. He spoke to the girls, but they only glared at him before turning their heads. Peg and her friends continued on while blasting him with insults. This, of course, seriously irritated him. After work, Peewee telephoned his supervisor, Roy Harrington, and informed him that he was in Charleston and wouldn't be able to come to work. He then drove to Peg Cuttino's home in Sumter and lurked outside for the opportunity to grab her. When she came outside, Peewee seized her and raced off to his car. While she struggled with him, he handcuffed the 13-year-old and placed duct tape on her mouth. He opened his trunk and tossed her inside. He then took her to his home and chained her to a table where he repeatedly violated and tortured the girl. Afterwards, he killed the child and discarded the body in an area where he knew she would be found. With the second confession, Gaskins delved more into the violations and bruises and marks found on her body, though his retelling of the crime is not entirely accurate. For starters, Peg Cuttino was not taken from her home in the middle of the night on December 19th. She was already missing at this point. He also stated that Peg and her friends walked past him at the end of his work day on Friday, December 18th, 1970. This did not happen at all. By the end of Peewee's work schedule on the date in question, the investigation into her disappearance was well underway. Now, if he meant that he noticed Peg and her friends while he was packing up his tools for his lunch hour, then there's a bit more credence to his story. Even still, the confession doesn't describe how she was murdered. This has led many to doubt that he had any true involvement in her murder. Most believe that he was merely seeking publicity to feed into his own sick, twisted ego. So if we rule out William Jr. Pierce's rather odd by-the-book confession and Peewee Gaskins' two erroneous confessions, then you are left with only the evidence. And evidence speaks volumes if you pay close attention to the details. Speculation. So what happened on December 18th, 1970? Peg left her home around noon to walk to her younger sister's school to visit her old elementary school teachers and attend her sister's Christmas party. Several neighbors recall seeing her walking on the sidewalk in the direction of the YMCA building and Willow Drive Elementary next door to it. I believe as she passed the YMCA building, she was summoned by a teenage girl in a beige Ford Comet across the street from the YMCA building. The set of homes across the street were duplexes and attracted lower working class individuals. These were the types of people that would not be in Peg's inner circle of friends. However, on this day, the teenage girl saw Peg and saw an opportunity and flagged Peg over for directions to another girl's home in the more affluent Alice Drive neighborhood. The teenage girl convinced Peg to get into the car and help her find the house of the other girl. Peg agreed to enter the car. She sat in the rear seat behind the teenage girl. She glanced over to the driver, whom she probably assumed was the teenage girl's parent. The older man kept quiet and allowed the teenage girl to do all the talking. They drove through the Alice Drive neighborhoods in search of the girl's house and was spotted by Noah Jerry Artrim. At this point, the teenage girl probably told Peg not to make a move and to stay calm. That's when the older male driver suddenly turned down a side street. Peg had to have known that she was being kidnapped at this stage. I believe the couple's intentions was to hold Peg ransom for money for Christmas, since they had fallen on hard times. They held her for an entire week. Where? Who knows? But I speculate that it was nearby in Wedgeville. Peg's disappearance gained such widespread attention that the plans to ransom her quickly vanished. Now the question became what to do with her. They couldn't return her with the knowledge of who they were. So based on the decomposition process, once Peg's body was found on Wednesday, December 30th, we can kinda estimate the time of death. There are many factors that can affect the decomposition rate, but the progression of decomposition of human body can typically be divided into several distinct stages: fresh, bloated, decay, post-decay, and dry skeletal. Peg's autopsy indicated that when the body was found, it was in the fresh stage of decomposition. There was no odor. The body was not bloated. There was no insect larva present on the body. This indicates to me that she was dead for about 24 to 48 hours, which means she was probably murdered on Monday, December 28th, not December 18th. There were no obvious signs of decomposition. Throughout this stage, certain early post-mortem indicators were present, such as livor mortis, or a pooling of blood in the front of Peg's body, which indicated she was lying on her stomach when murdered, rigor mortis, a stiffening of muscles, as such the case of Peg's arms being stretched around her head and found to be in a stiffening position, and algor mortis, body temperature reduction. So, Peg was held from at least Friday, December 18th through Monday, December 28th. She was held for 10 days somewhere near Wedgeville. The teenage girl's role in all of this was to lure Peg into the car and keep her company for the week she was being held. But eventually, everyone agreed that Peg could not return home, or they would all be arrested. So Peg had to be killed. She was alive when she was brought to the wooded area in Wedgeville and under the cover of darkness led into the woods by the sash that was wrapped around her neck to prevent her from running off. She was then told to lie down on the ground where she was struck with a tire jack in the back of the head. when she panicked and tried to run. Blood evidence on the nearby leaves indicated that she was strongly killed at the scene. The perpetrator then violated and tortured the corpse. The presence of sperm in her private parts indicated that this happened very close to her death, as well as the presence of scratches, bruises, burns all over her hips, thighs, and legs. This indicated the perpetrator was a smoker and probably used a cigarette to inflict the burns on the body. Then the perpetrator covered her body slightly with branches, leaves, and moss before leaving. Her body was found a couple of days later. The perpetrator was not William Jr. Pierce, as he was at work in Georgia during all of this, as indicated by his employment time cards and numerous employees vouching for him during this time, as well as his girlfriend. William was a habitual confessor to crimes that he had no knowledge of, as indicated by many law enforcement officers. And more importantly, there is no known written or recorded confession and no evidence tying him to Peg's murder. Also, William had red hair. Pubic hairs found on Peg were black. William Pierce did not murder Peg. The perpetrator was not Donald Peewee Gaskins either, as he was at work on the roof of the YMCA building the day Peg disappeared. However, it is likely that he did see her walking past and get into the car across the street from the YMCA building. I attest that he was not involved in her abduction or murder. His bragging about the murder years later is just that, bragging. Peewee is a slight man and short in stature. He wanted to be feared in prison. So what better way to do that than create a persona to make inmates terrified to be around? The perpetrator and his teenage girlfriend got away with the abduction and murder of Margaret Cuttino. They got lucky that William Pierce confessed to the crime and all attention was diverted toward him. As far as I'm concerned, without more evidence to sway me, I believe this is most likely how Margaret Cuttino, the Princess of Sumter, was abducted and murdered. If you like this breakdown and would like me to review other cases, please indicate in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe. I will see you again in 2 weeks with another case breakdown and my opinion on how the kidnapping, abduction, disappearance, or murder occurred. Until next time, this is Essential True Crime.